you're in the right place if you're excited to join in the conversation around value selling and really building a culture around it. It's not just a framework, a sales framework. It starts with your product team and marketing and engineering. And yes, it ends with the tip of the spear, which is, the revenue org with sales, with CS, implementations, et cetera. Um, and I think the first question that I'll pose, maybe we'll go in reverse order here. So Julie, I'll put you on the spot. Is, why is this the hot topic of, not just 2024, but really I think the last 18-ish plus months? Why do all of a sudden we need to get better about talking about our customers' impact and quantifying that versus just selling features and functionality? I think a lot of people have gotten away with that for a long time. And really there's this big kind of like retraining and re-up leveling of the craft of go to market. Again, it's not just for sellers, but across the entire org. So, Julia, I'll pass it off to you and get your take on, why you think this is, so important these days.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we've all observed just a huge transition in how we're interacting with customers and how we need to sell over the last 18 months, to your point. I think COVID was a really interesting time across technology, and people got used to selling a certain way, and it's become very apparent that we can't continue to sell in the way that a lot of companies have been, or continue to count on the same level of, say, inbound interest, for those of you in the SaaS space, or kind of count on a strategy that might be a little bit more heavily weighted to talking about product features and functions. Like, that's just not going to cut it anymore at this point. We absolutely need to be showing how our solutions are going to impact customers' bottom line, how they impact revenue, cost, or risk. For those of you that have worked with, and just to use some of the force management terminology, I think that becomes progressively more important in a market like the one that we have been in for the last 18 months. And I think customers expect it too. So one of the transitions that Freshworks has gone through, and I should mention, I work specifically with our field team. So we have a fabulous SMB sales organization. I work with our field organization that is selling more to our enterprise and strategic accounts. And in that space, it's an expectation. So like we need to be able to speak to the business value of our solutions if we're going to get to the executives we need to be speaking with, and frankly, if we're going to get people's attention today.
Totally. Yeah. To recap, I think the bar has just been raised in terms of what is expected from customers. They don't want to make those leaps themselves. They want you to do that work for them. And like you said, you need to de-risk a lot of these deals these days. But yeah, Charles, what about yourself? Why do you think this is such a focus across, regardless of company stage, product, et cetera? It just seems ubiquitous.
Yeah, I'll try and be additive to what Julie said, but I agree with a lot of what she had mentioned. I think, look, customers can get information on product anywhere they want, and they're not looking to salespeople to tell them more about features. They're looking for salespeople to try and understand their business and figure out what their problems are and find a partner to help them address those problems. I don't think it necessarily comes down to the solution itself. I think that's number one. And number two, I think budgets are tighter. I think companies have bought a lot of technology and they're questioning whether or not they've gotten value out of this technology over the last 5 or so years. And they're going, you know what? It's time to reconcile the spend and really determine the vendors that are going to help us take us to the next level. And it's going to be those vendors who can sit down with them and understand what's going on and really try and solution for them versus selling them products and subscriptions. I think that's kind of the simple way to think about it. I'm here today onboarding a bunch of people in Dublin, and we were practicing proof points. And I said, like, if we're value selling, does the customer care more about our solution or how well you know their problem? And the answer is easy. It's how well you know their problem. And that's where you build trust, and that's where it starts. And so, I think between their purchasing habits, their budget, and the need to build trust, it's kind of clear that that's the direction, we need to go.
Totally. Yeah. The bar is teach them something about their own business these days, is not how well do you know your product, for sure. And Bailey, to round us out, what do you think?
Yeah, just to add on top of all that, I'm not sure, Julie and Charles, if you guys have read, kind of the new book by the co-author of the Challenger Sale, The Jolt Effect. I think that really kind of summarizes, got a hand up for that one. Like, kind of really summarizes the landscape we're in today, where, like, buyers like us, there's much more of a fear of messing up than there is of a fear of missing out on a technology. And there's a fear of like, am I going to lose my job on this implementation, or if this goes wrong, or if I take this risk on this technology? Like that's much more the risk I'm taking with going with something new. It's much easier to go with a status quo. Like you really have to listen to make a cost of inaction feel real. So totally agree with everything that was said previously, but that's what I would add on.
I like what you said there, because I feel like there's just an inundation of technology choices. And think about with the start of AI and how much risk that all of a sudden brings to a business to have to think about putting their proprietary data into some system that they don't know whether or not that data is being used aggregately across the technology. That's really scary for them. And at some point, all the technologies start to look the same. It's going, at a product level, and look at your website, they're all the same. So which one am I going to choose? And hopefully I'm going to probably choose the company that's given me the great experience, who's really leaning to understand what's going on and is focused on me, right? In my
Who's
business.
being a buyer's agent,
There you go.
you know?
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a great point. So I think generally we all agree the bar is higher for whatever reasons. There's a lot of different reasons, macro markets, individual companies, job market as well. You can't just turn around and get a million offers, from recruiters that are hitting you up every day on like things have changed. And it's not just one of those classic, decks like what has changed and making compelling reason. Like, yes, everyone agrees the world is different right now. So what do you do with it? And that's what we want to talk about. We want to get really tactical. We want this to be advice from things that we've tried and failed and then figured out some other stuff that's worked. And that's what we want to spend the next, 20, 30 minutes on, talking about how do you truly build a culture of it? Because I think what I found is you can't just say, we're going to do this acronym and all of a sudden we're going to be a value selling organization, or we're just going to do, this operational thing around forecast meetings or cut up our forecast in different ways and talk about risks and deals. It needs to be an entire tops down company wide initiative to really think about deals and sales in your company. From kind of what Charles said, is like you need to be teaching people about their own businesses, and to do that is not from one onboarding session. It's a cultural conversation every single time you do your all hands down to your meeting. So maybe we can just throw out like some example of what we found to be one of the most important things in between the four of us, hopefully. And please jump in with what you found to be really helpful or not, and that you've tried to really instill this culture of value first, impact first selling. So who wants to jump in? Julie, I see you have some ideas there.
Yeah, no, I would love to, because I can speak to some things I've tried and failed and some things that
Please,
have
yes. Maybe let's start with everyone said one thing that they've tried and hasn't absolutely worked. And I have some great examples of that too. And then something that you found really clicks.
Yeah, well, I think one thing you mentioned is just the importance of this being a top-down initiative. And I think I'd go even further than that and say that, yes, of course, this requires executive support. But this not only requires executive support, this really requires a lot of buy-in from across the sales leadership team and across the management team. And I think I have been in situations in the past where we rolled this out, where you have the top level support and you train the reps, but if you don't focus on the managers first, I think that can be really detrimental, because you need those people in that whole team to be along for the ride, not just along for the ride, but actually driving that change with their teams effectively. So you can train managers, but it's not only that, it's making sure that they see the value before you kick that off and before you start the training. Because if you have all of this investment happening, but then you have one or two naysayers in the wrong place, I think that can be challenging. Like everybody needs to understand what's in it for them and how it's going to impact the organization and why you're doing it. So that's one thing that I would say is really major, is not just like, I think we all know starting with the management team is important, but starting with the why. And I'm seeing you're asking folks here, like, what is the biggest challenge you face? And yeah, I think, making sure that people are on board with the change and that you have a solid change management plan in place to drive this behavioral change is really critical. And I'm sure Bailey, Charles, I'm sure you both have thoughts to add there as well.
I'm just laughing as like the sole RevOps panelists alongside two enablement panelists, because that is where a lot of change management can fail. And I can speak as a RevOps person of where initiatives in the past have failed where I haven't partnered with my enablement counterparts and I've made CRM requirements, but when you don't have like the training side of things to bookend that, and you don't have the frontline managers buy-in, I think we talked about this even during like the Accord implementation as well. Like any RevOps or enablement strategy lives and dies with frontline managers. Like that's just facts. Like the CRO can ask you to do something, but if the frontline managers aren't bought in, like it's not happening.
Yeah, if it doesn't make sense for them. And I think a lot of modern initiatives around value selling come from a lot of consultants, and consultants are great in terms of, again, the why, but not the how you're going to get it done. And I think that's where the biggest gap that I've seen is we have this great strategy. Yes, MEDDPICC makes sense. Yes, force management makes sense, all these things. How do you translate that to like what you're saying, Bailey and Julie, the front line? That's where a lot of these projects go to die. You have great CRO
Well, and how do
buy-in, they
you,
spend all the money, and yeah, go for it.
yeah, and how are you ingraining it into your processes, both at, like the top down forecast level, the leadership forecast level, that's great, but are your reps talking about it from that bottoms up view forecast roll up that you're getting as well?
And that's the hard part. Yes, that's definitely the big challenge. I see. Yeah, Charles, you're about to jump in there.
I just think like I'm really lucky. I mean, I work at a company where value selling is the lifeblood of the company. It's been proven in the past at organizations that our CEO has been at. We've measured the effectiveness of it in the past. We know that it speeds up our deals 100%. We know that it increases deal size 4x. And so those are the kind of metrics that all reps want. And so because it's in our culture, we recruit for it heavily. We test for it. We teach it as soon as you get in the door. We teach you, command of the message. We teach you MEDDPICC. We also teach you our customer journey and the importance of the touch points along that journey to drive consumption. And then to Bailey's point, I mean, it's interwoven to our sales process. So, at each stage in the process where command of the message falls, at each stage of the sales process where MEDDPICC falls in that. And so you can run your QBRs, manage your one-on-ones, and even performance management all through that framework. And because it's reinforced in all of those various ways, it just starts becoming the DNA. And because we have a customer journey, it's not just our reps who are involved, it's our customer success managers, our solutions architects, our professional sales, our professional services people. So they're all speaking that language in all of those touch points.
Yeah.
Without that, it becomes really difficult to reinforce. Like you have to move the army all in the same direction, right?
Yeah, and I think that's an advantageous spot to be in because I think like when you're rolling it out for the first time, that change management piece, to Julie's point, is really hard to get right. Adobe had a really good framework for it. It's called like ADKAR, and it's like you build awareness around the change, you build desire for the change, knowledge, the training about the change. But then where people lose it is like the ability and then reinforcing the change. And that's what your org sounds like you're doing really, really well, is reinforcing this is what we do.
Yeah, it's the playbook, and you don't have an option to do something different. Because as soon as you try and do something different, you recognize that everybody around you is not going to play that game. They're like, wait a minute, that's not the language we speak, right? It comes like, this is the shared language that we all know, and you're sort of put back into that, that aperture narrows on you a little bit.
And maybe it's a good segue, and we'll hit. Brian has an awesome, really tactical question that we can hit next. But just to kind of double down on this point, it sounds like a lot of folks are saying, both it starts tops down, but it also needs to be enforced bottoms up. What are some very tactical things that folks can do, either working with their leadership team or working with the frontline managers and sellers, to help reinforce and build the why, and kind of champion value selling? I'll have one example. I think the thing that both leaders and sellers love the best is a closed won deal. And I think going through and championing those top reps and frontline leaders that do this really well as the spark to ignite the shift to value selling, and talking about exactly how they did it. What was the why behind the deal? Who was the champion? Maybe getting them come in, maybe getting the customer to come in and talk about how this was a great way and how they were able to have conversations, like Brian said, behind closed doors. I always find when we do a kickoff, like we always just try to get the great frontline seller or frontline manager to get up, because that's the truth. And that's what everyone's going to work for every single day. And it feels more authentic because it's not necessarily someone's opinion. This is what happened with the customer. So that's my one kind of magic bullet. But yeah, maybe we'll go in reverse order. We'll go Charles, Bailey, Julie on what's the one thing that you felt like really works to orient the team around these best practices?
Yeah, if we're talking like really bottoms up, it's sort of two things, but they're very similar. So we use what's called a discovery capture sheet, and the discovery capture sheet is built through the framework of command to the message. And it's like, if you're having a discovery call, this is the framework you use. And so we teach them why, but then we teach the frontline managers how to coach to the sheet, not just how to review it. And so during that process, we actually have the managers go through, fill it out, and then coach each other. And then we have them go back to their team on a weekly basis. You're going to pull somebody from your team. You're going to review their disco capture sheet. You're going to show what good looks like, and you're going to show where something went wrong. And the team starts to see the pattern of what good looks like and what that results in as the deal progresses through the sales process. But it requires both of those. If you're not coaching them, if you're not teaching the manager how to coach, then they're just inspecting, and the reps feel like they're just adhering to a process.
Yeah.
But if the managers are actually asking the right questions, it's forcing the sales rep to think about, oh, why do I need a current state?
Yeah. And to do a different action, right? The whole thing is to do a different thing. And I think we sometimes get lost in the prep call sheet and the inspection thing and the things just to do the things instead of like, this is meant to change behavior, right? This is meant to have a different outcome.
Not compliance. This isn't for compliance, right? And so,
Yeah.
but it could be very easily be compliance if your managers don't understand what you're trying to drive towards. So you have to be able to enable both of those to do it really well, I think. But so that's one of the things that we do, and it starts kind of day one. We teach you that when you come to our onboarding academy, and then you'll see that all the way through your progression. Whether you've been here 3 years or 3 days, we're still using the same process.
Awesome. Bailey, how about yourself? I mean, a bit unfair too, because you're on the ops side, but yeah, what have you found to be a difference maker?
I was going to say, it's almost like you were at our sales kickoff last week with the customer session. We did have a customer sharing their story on site at our kickoff last week, and that's always nice when we can hear it directly from them in their own words, their experience with their sales rep and how the sales rep understood their business and led to, the expansion within their business. But we do a lot of sharing of wins, of sharing deal stories, but we even like ahead of that, like we'll do a lot of peer-to-peer chorus call inspection. So similar to the discovery sort of sheet call inspection, but chorus, and we'll iterate on specific parts of like a first sales interaction call from within chorus, and not just manager to peer, but peer to peer.
Yeah, I always found that as a seller, I preferred to be on with the best other seller who has the great talk tracks and jamming out on some of the strategy and having that picked apart by someone who's also on the front lines instead of leadership. So yeah, that's a great tip. Julie, how about yourself?
Yeah, I would just add, since we're talking about like how tools can be used to like drive that bottoms up approach, I think but using tools like Gong or Chorus and like Accord, I think that does drive that bottoms up approach, in that people can see these things in action. It gives them very specific examples. They can see like, oh, okay, we have a champion here that is interacting very heavily with our mutual action plan, or, oh, hey, look at this call for this closed won deal where, we actually spent a lot of time digging into not just identifying pain, but implicating pain and tying this to metrics and figuring out what specifically this customer was hoping to accomplish. So I think leveraging tools effectively to drive methodology is huge as well for driving that bottoms up adoption.
Totally. Yeah. Kind of going back to the first point of like, you can't expect what you can't inspect, right? You can't ask your team to go and do this thing if there's no way of measuring it and championing. I think a lot of people look at the opposite way, as kind of sales gets a bad rap, because I think we focus sometimes on the losses more and the negative stuff. But like our number one tip for driving adoption of, business value cases and multi-threading and executive alignment, all those things, is champion the times that it's happening. Hey, Sarah got looped in this new stakeholder. This is what they said. This is what it led to. Instead of just going through the deals and saying, hey, you're missing your economic buyer. You're missing this thing. You didn't do this thing. Yeah.
It's a great call out. Yeah. So it's celebrating like the wins of the wins, right? Those micro wins along the journey.
Yes.
That so the light bulb goes off at some moment when people hear like, oh, That's how you move from champion economic buyer approval. Okay, got it. Sometimes it's difficult when you're listening to the whole play, but if you just zoom into that 10 seconds, right, the light bulb goes off. So I love that advice. Focus on the small ones.
Totally. I want to see that email that you sent. I want to see that LinkedIn DM. I want to know the exact talk track, right? Like that's the stuff that matters. And I feel like a lot of it gets lost with, again, the acronyms and the big picture stuff, right? The beauty
The
and the
check
art
the
is in
box
the,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because there's the big disconnect, especially at bigger companies at scale, like each of yours. There's so many layers between the CRO and the frontline person that needs to do that micro thing. And it's really hard at every level down to be translating the why and the how we need to do it to the actual words and deck and talk track and emails. But this is a really good tie-in. I would love to hear everyone's advice on Brian's question here in the Q&A, because this is money. When 80-90% of the sale is done behind closed doors, what are some ways that you can value sell without being in front of the customer? This is, I think, one of the number one things that I hear from frontline managers and sellers. Like, we get it. You're supposed to implicate pain. You're supposed to quantify these things. How are you doing this when you're not in front of them? So yeah, Julie, I'll pass it back to you on this one if you have any ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why people talk so much about having a champion being one of the most critical elements as a MEDDPICC practitioner. I think this is something that comes up so frequently, is the need to essentially enable your customer to do the selling for you behind closed doors. And I think that's why, again, there needs to be so much focus there on identifying that individual or multiple individuals in an ideal scenario within an account that has power and influence within the account that is going to be able to sell for you behind closed doors, and that has a really strong vested interest in the specific project and making it successful. So I think that's why that's so important. I think
Any tips? Any things that you've done? And I know half of your career has been in selling, not just enablement, but any things that you in particular found that was helpful to arm them to go and make that case for your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this is like to the point made earlier about the importance of understanding the customer's business problems and being able to provide valuable insights. Having really strong proof points has come up a couple of times, I think, both in the conversation and in the chat. So being able to arm your champion with the right proof points that are highly relevant to their business, essentially giving them what they need from a collateral standpoint so that they can do this internally. Really summarizing for them the value that this is going to bring to their business. So working with them on building out that business case. One question that I think came up earlier in the chat that I thought was interesting was, okay, great, if everyone's selling this way, like how do you stand apart? And I will say from my sales career, this just very much stands out in my memory. This is a lost deal that I worked on where I remember thinking like, gosh, I did such a good job on this business case. Like, how did I lose this deal? And when I talked to the customer, he basically said, well, yeah, but I could get that same benefit from this company or your competitors, which is why focusing in on the differentiation that ties specifically to that customer's challenges and what they're trying to accomplish, like focusing in there is so critical. So really understanding their specific needs and what you can offer that addresses those needs, I think is really important. That was a big lesson learned for me early on in my sales career, that you can have a great business case, but if you don't make it clear how you are different and how you can provide unique value to that customer, especially if you are not the low cost leader in the space, you're not going to be in a great position there. So that's some of my advice from lessons learned.
Appreciate the candor on a closed lost one. But yes, I think where my mind goes to, I'm not sure if anyone's read this book, but it's a really short one and was the big aha moment for me in my career around differentiation. It's called Positioning by April Dunford. I'll put it in the chat here. It basically talks about the only thing you're really selling is what's different to you relative to other options. It is not you in a vacuum. And hearing those examples and going through that was like, again, I don't know how this isn't required reading for every seller. It's for marketing, but every seller should be thinking about their life relative and their product relative to the status quo and the other options out there, not in the amazing product that you're, all drinking from the Kool-Aid and love the product itself, obviously. But that's a great reminder, Julie. But
Julie, you gave me flashbacks to deals that I've lost, and I just got really nervous. I'm still not over it 10 years later.
What about you, Charles? What have you found?
It's funny in my opening, kicking off this event yesterday, I said, like, Everybody in the room is the competitive differentiation. It's not our product. And I think it really comes down. I think when you're selling like this behind a computer, it's easy to get lazy. It's easy to forget to get dressed for the meeting, to show up professionally, to edit your deck, to make sure that you've prepared a point of view. Like the controllables can get really easy to lose sight on. When you show up to a customer and you've got your manager with you, like you're probably pretty buttoned up and ready to go because you don't want to be embarrassed. So I think one of the easiest things to do is just prepare, right? Like know your ideal customer profile, the problems they typically have. To Julie's point, you prepared a couple of proof points. Know the persona, the challenges they have, and be able to speak to the persona and show up in a way that the customer knows that you cared about that call. The easiest way to lose the deal is the customer's like, you're treating me just like the phone call before, which was probably 50% of what you should have done, and the call's over with. So that's my tip. Take time to prepare. Don't be lazy. Every meeting can lead to the next meeting. You never know what's going to happen. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think both of you made really strong points there. I think the only thing I would add, if we're going to throw out books, like I've just read Think Again by Adam Grant. And a lot of my takeaways from there was like, wow, I need to read Dale Carnegie again. I need to read How to Win Friends and Influence People again. I think everyone's biggest superpower is being authentically themselves. And I think that's a salesperson's biggest strength, because especially like when so many like of our products in our spaces do have similar features and functionalities, like the way you show up, the way you prepare, the way you come to a meeting and present your product as an individual can be the way you stand out, and the way you can like
a huge point, which is also do what you say you're going to do. Like your follow-up accountability is huge, because a lot of people will not follow up, or they'll follow up, but they'll miss steps. So I mean, Bill, your point is spot on, right?
Or like that whole point of like being a buyer's agent, like especially at Exactly, like we have some pretty complex solutions, and like I'm not a stranger to that. Like I use our own stuff. Like we cover all ends of the RevOps cycle. I use our products. Like it's complex. It's complex to do territory quota management. Like it puts a lot on us to be honest about like what we can and can't do. You earn credibility with people that way.
Yeah, that's funny that you bring up How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's like top 3 book, definitely top 1 business book, because every time I read them, like everything is just simple when you think about, and not just being the likable person and remember their name, but the stuff we're talking about, right? Like thinking about their problems, reframing it. Hey, we talk about the same thing. The rep at Mongo that's been there for 2, 3, 4 years is going to know more than the CTO or the most senior person at the company about that thing. And like, this is how I always thought about it at Stripe. I was like, I'm not an engineer. I'm talking to, the coolest companies in the world, their VPs of engineering and product and all that stuff. I'm teaching them because I've seen 17 other companies that are similar recently try to do the exact same thing. It's not because I'm smarter, all this stuff. You need to have that confidence and come with, hey, this is how other people have done it, blah, 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 authentically. That's what you're bringing in as a seller. And I think that's where the world's going, as everyone's talking about like automating SDRs and like automating sellers workflow. Like your job is to be a sophisticated, buyer agent or consultant or whatever you want to put it, that is simplifying the world for them and helping them make less risky decisions. And I just don't think that that's the framework or mental model that a lot of sellers or leaders or companies have around their field. And I think great companies like, obviously all 3 of you think that way, and leadership top down think that way, your companies, but that's the vast minority, vast minority. And the question, hey, are other people doing this? They're not. I'm sorry. No one else. If you're doing this, the person that's pitching on the side of this competitive deal, I can guarantee you the chance that they're doing the things that you're doing, if you're even on this podcast or masterclass, they're not doing it. And I think it's a huge differentiator that we take for granted. I don't think we realize that putting in that extra work is having you stand out, and it is that simple, but we just for some reason don't do it.
Well, you said something interesting that kind of caught my attention, which is right, you've talked to 17 customers and you've heard what their problem is, and you're sort of in this challenger sale approach, right? Like I've seen this pattern before. Don't follow the conventional wisdom, kind of do this thing, right? But you're bringing that perspective and you're being consultative. It's not about your commission check. It's about the customer and their problem. And those deals typically take longer, because they're more complex. And sometimes it's really hard for reps to balance the urgency of their commission check with the patience that their customers need.
I
But
know it.
if you can, the other thing we try and do here is really model out. We've got a group of sellers who are, we call them pod reps. They're strategic reps. They own a singular account. We might have 2 reps on an account. We might have a whole region on one account. And that account might have taken 3 years to get to that point where that rep's making 7 figures. And the new reps coming in the door being like, I want to be that. But month 6 and 9 hits and they're like, but I need to make some money now. And that pressure starts to build and the bad habits start to come out. And you've got to help them stay really disciplined on, wait a minute, focus on the customer, the outcome will get there. And if they're just patient, they're going to hit that hockey stick and take off. But if you can't help them stay focused, that's where they start getting in that trough of like disillusionment of, I'm not good at my job. This product isn't good anymore. It's not working. No, you're moving
They
away.
can't trust the process.
You can't trust the process, right? And that's where that culture comes to continually reinstill that process, that confidence back in the rep.
Totally. And that's why this stuff is harder, like the field stuff, right? Like everyone on this call, like, the beauty of these products are that you can solve really big problems that you can charge a lot of money for, but it's really sophisticated. There's a lot of, people involved, validation stages, technical, business, etc. And celebrating those wins, getting that new stakeholder stoked about it and sending a note to like all these little things. It's easier to look at activity. It's easier to look at SMB meetings booked, 1 or 2 call closes. Like that stuff I think is simple. And the reason why I love and why, went off and built Accord from being an enterprise seller was, how do you think about building a process and celebrating those wins and knowing you're doing the right stuff and being able to trust the process in an objective way? And I think that's the goal around all this value selling framework MEDDPICC stuff is like, hey, we feel good about it for being a stage 2 deal, for being a stage 3 deal, being for, instead of just needing that, quick 2, 5, 10K opportunity. So I think that's the challenge with all these roles and building and value selling, especially to a field organization, is the payoffs are really far out, but they're really big. So.
Sorry for monopolizing the conversation here, but Julie, something you said about your deal loss, like rung a bell in my head about my deal losses when I'm like, man, this was like the perfect situation. How did I lose? But when I think about value-based selling and selling from behind your desk, we go back to that concept, like, and to sell big deals and sell them effectively, you got to attach to the biggest problems. That's like one of the core concepts of command of the message, right? And I have attached to the wrong problem with the right solution, right problem for me. Customers like, that's the wrong problem to solve, therefore I'm not buying it. So big problems have big decision makers. They move money to solve those problems, and they happen more quickly, right? So just remember, like, as you're doing your preparation, to really think about what is the big thing that my solution ties to, not the thorn in the bottom of my foot that this one feature can alleviate, right? There's a big difference.
Totally.
And maybe to wrap up with, we're talking about culture. Culture starts with people. How does this group think about bringing on the right people and building that mindset around tying to these big, not everyone can do it, or not everyone has been trained to. Is that an innate thing? Is that something you take responsibility as an organization to train around? Is something you look for people? Maybe Julie, we'll start with you, because I think this is the thing that I obsess over is like, is someone born with this business acumen that can tie to big problems and talk to, the C-suite and VP level problems? And hey, this is, we're talking about going international. We're talking about the big thing versus, the feature, the small like automation workflow thing that's not going to be prioritized, maybe, push out to 25 or 26. So how do you think about that? Is it hiring the right people? Is it us taking responsibility of the training? How do we get people to layer up to those big problems to make sure they don't get deprioritized?
Yeah. Well, one thing we talk a lot about at Freshworks is having a growth mindset, and you'll hear our CEO talk about this internally. It's a huge focus for us, and it's a focus for us in hiring. Are we hiring people that have a growth mindset and that are going to be focused on continuous learning, continuous improvement, always working to be better at what we do? And so, like, to answer your question, I think part of the hiring is definitely part of it, but I think it's also making sure that we're continuing to cultivate that and emphasize the importance of it. I do think there is some onus on both, I would say, like the sales leadership and enablement, and making sure everyone has what they need to execute on this, and that it is constantly reinforced because the environment has changed so significantly in the last couple of years. So, there is some behavior change necessary in some cases. Like people are used to selling a certain way, maybe selling all virtually, where now there's an ask to, hey, go meet with your customers on site. To maybe again being used to getting a certain amount of inbound interest that and then things shift. So I think there is some onus on us to give people the tools that they need. And that's, again, methodology plays such a big role in that, of giving people like a framework and a roadmap that they can execute on. And so, yeah, I think it's everything you said. It's hiring, it's training. And then again, at Freshworks, we are just very big on emphasizing that growth mindset and the idea that we all need to be focused on how we can continually improve and get better at our craft.
Totally. Yeah. That company-wide, having the CEO say that makes it a lot easier for frontline leaders to reinforce that and to train new people and say you can do new things, for sure. Bailey, what about yourself? What do you think? Is it hiring the right people? Is it, the mental model internally? Is it up to, your team, to make it happen?
I mean, it's definitely all of the above. We are very much a growth mindset company. That's the message from the top down here as well. And again, that Adam Grant book, Think Again, has a lot of really good frameworks for challenging yourself on that, and even like kind of self-reflection and how, like, as a RevOps leader, can I challenge that? But I guess from an ops perspective, I kind of think of my responsibility as like a three-pronged approach. Like, it's people, process, and technology. Like, are we hiring the right people? Are we hiring people that have the ability to have a growth mindset? As a company, like separate from technology, do we have the right process and methodologies in place to help support us? And then from a technology component, which would be, I guess, the piece that I own, are we supporting those processes to support the people to get the best results?
Yeah, definitely all waterfalls into each other. Yeah, the people, the process, and the technology to reinforce it, because you can't be everywhere at once. Charles, to round us out, how do you think about this?
I guess just to be additive, I think the one leg of the table we're not talking about is just the reps being accountable to themselves.
Yeah.
I think if you're a rep in this environment not focused on value selling, you're missing out. And if you're waiting for your company to do it for you, you're missing out. And you need to take that initiative and lean into some of the resources you've all talked about and the research and go, man, what are the things I can do tomorrow to change my process or my behavior? And then if the company's providing it to me, then, you need to really take advantage of it and lean into that, because I think the destiny is, in their hands. But, I would echo what my peers have said here, right? It comes down to all of those other elements of recruit for it, train for it, performance management to it, and then make sure the reps are holding themselves accountable.
Charles, I think that's so important. Yeah. Well said.
I think it's the hardest part, though. I think the hardest part, because it's such a, especially we're talking about field sales, like it's such a creative, subjective job in a lot of ways. It's very hard to make objective. And yes, we want to align it to frameworks and discovery things. It's so hard because when you're on the call, there's sometimes where you can't book the next meeting. That's the right thing. There's sometimes, there's just little things that add up. Yes, overall, you can see where gaps are. I think it's really hard when it's not just about call volume and it's not just about, things on the calendar. It's really, really hard early on to coach to it. Yes, once you get enough data points, it becomes, stupid obvious in hindsight. It's really hard to be super proactive, I think, in the accountability side of things. And it's really hard for frontline leaders to do that stuff when all these deals are really complex. Like they could just be looking at one or two deals, let alone every single rep on their team. And looking at the ratios these days, it's higher than ever in terms of how many reps a manager or director has. So I think, yeah, the accountability aspect of this is the key. And how do you, this is what I've been obsessing over as a leader, even, moving from sales to CEO, is setting expectations, making it clear, what are our standards? What do we expect? What does great look like? And being able to have that champion and then tie and making it obvious that, hey, this is what this person's doing to be successful. Look at what you're doing. Like, let's make it obvious. It's very hard to do that, but I think that's kind of the secret to this all.
If you can't tell somebody what good looks like, then you can't expect them to do what you want them to do to the standard, right?
Correct.
And so
and I get this wrong all the time. This is my number one thing as a lead. Like, it's so, you lose sight of what's in the back of your mind as what great looks like. and you don't translate it for your team and you ask them to do something and they don't, and you're like, well, who's at fault? It's me.
The leader.
Yeah. But Julie, you're about to jump in.
I was just going to say, like, building on, we were talking about the growth mindset, we were talking about personal accountability. I think just one thing to emphasize is the importance of practice too. And I know, again, as an enablement leader, this is something we talk about all the time, but it is funny how we don't think in those terms oftentimes as sellers, like the criticality of practicing. So once you do have what good looks like outlined for you, getting really comfortable, spending the time to practice and holding yourself accountable to that so that you're not practicing on live customer conversations, I think is a big one.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Any final thoughts? I know we're about to be a minute over, but I think this was pretty tight time wise, and so many things. I got to get this book, Think Again.
I would recommend
well.
The Qualified Sales Leader
Oh yeah.
by John McMahon.
Oh.
Like if you're
Another favorite book
a rep or
Adding to cart.
there you go. Yeah, there you go. Right. Whether you're a rep or a leader, like the story will help you understand how powerful it is to value-based sell and how to coach your reps through some of that. And it's a simple read. It's a really well done story, and highly recommend it.
Qualified sales leader for those that
Yes.
didn't
So
get
it's The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon.
Yeah, so many ways to get better outside of waiting for your team to do it. And that's everyone that's on the call. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Charles, Julie, Bailey, for making the time out of your busy days to share with the community your thoughts, and hopefully a lot of great takeaways for most of the people listening to this after, because they're all on hopefully sales calls right now or coaching their team or doing all the things we need to do 9 to 5. But this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.